Oh boy, Bitcoin Brown here. Hey, doing a lot of work today. Let's kind of get our story straight on this whole Ukraine situation. Now, I'm not taking sides. I'm just trying to see what's going on here. Now, let's step back in time 20 years ago when the U.S. government lied us into a war in Iraq when they said they had weapons of mass destruction, and we ended up killing 1 million Iraqi people for no reason. Okay. So that's why I'm very skeptical when the U.S. government tells me anything. And you should be skeptical too. I don't say you shouldn't believe them all the time, but there should always be a healthy dose of skepticism when the government lied us into a war after the UN security and Hans Blix said, hey, there are no WMDs in Iraq. They don't pose a threat. We went in there and we set the Middle East on fire for over 20 years, and 1 million Iraqis got killed, and we're still bombing right now in Syria and Yemen and everywhere else. So the U.S. government, not the U.S. people, but the U.S. government doesn't have a lot of moral high ground to stand on. Okay, so keep that in the back of your mind. So now, in Ukraine, very complicated situation. Back in 2014, when President Obama and Biden were in the White House, there was a duly elected pro-Russian government that went into power in the Ukraine. Well, the U.S. government says we can't have that. We got to get rid of that. So a CIA-backed color revolution overthrew them, and they put a pro-Western authoritarian Zelensky into power. This is the group that came into power. Unfortunately, a lot of these people are neo-fascists. They call them neo-Nazi. Okay, call them neo-Nazi, but they're neo-fascists. And this is a long, complicated history with Ukraine because there was a connection to Nazi Germany, because when the Germans were fighting the Russians, the Ukraine said, hey, this is our way out of the communist empire. We'll side with the Germans, the neo-Nazis, the Nazis at that time period, and we'll try to fight our way out. Well, the Russians have never forgotten that, because if you were a Russian male born in 1920, 81% of that generation was killed in the Second World War. If it hadn't been for the Russians, the Allies, that's the Americans, British, all the Allies, we probably couldn't have defeated Germany until we'd have to probably use an atomic bomb on Berlin. We won in the Pacific, the Americans did, but we probably wouldn't have beat the Germans if it wasn't for the Russians. And the Germans were in a race against time with their heavy water experiments to get a nuclear bomb. If it hadn't been for the Russians helping us, the Germans might have got an atomic bomb, hit Berlin. They might have also nuclear torpedoed New York City. We'd have lived in a very different world if that had happened. So to the Russian mind, they just don't understand why we hate them, because we're like, hey, we were your allies, and if it wasn't for us and for our massive sacrifices, you guys probably wouldn't have survived D-Day with Eisenhower. So that's complicated. So you have this pro-neo-fascist movement in the Ukraine. All right, now, so that neo-fascist movement has been responsible for hideous deaths of Russian civilians in the Donbass region, which is Russian-speaking, and there have been people burnt alive. Now, I showed you that Putin brought those crematoriums in there, and there's a reason he did that, is because he's telling the neo-Nazis, you're going in those things. I mean, this is savagery, people. This is hatred that we don't really understand between these people. And again, I'm not taking sides. I'm not a Putinist. I'm just saying you got to understand the complexity here. So the Donbass region has Russian-speaking people. They're Russian. They've been brutalized. They're rebels against the Ukrainian authoritarian regime, puppet regime, the United States and the CIA and the Color Revolution put in there. And they're being killed, by Ukrainian neo-fascists, neo-Nazis are killing these Russians, people, and actually burning them alive. So Putin sees all this, and he's like, hey, so the Russians there are asking Putin for help. And so therefore, he's got a pretense to come into Ukraine. Meanwhile, we're still trying to bring the Ukraine into NATO. Now, that's a complicated discussion on that alone. But I'm trying to set the stage for you here that this isn't as simple as you think it is. And Putin came in for a lot of reasons. But the Donbass region and the killing of those Russian civilians inside of Ukraine was one reason, or at least a pretense he had to go in. And the world has largely ignored the plight of those people in that region, including the United States, because we're keeping our puppet regime going there. Now, so Putin must have gone crazy, and then he invaded, and I could have understood, and I wouldn't have agreed with it, but I could have understood why Putin would have gone into the two breakaway territories and said, okay, these are now autonomous regions. We're coming in and driving the neo-fascists out. So when you hear Putin say he's going to denazify the Ukraine, it's because of what happened in the Donbass region, because these neo-fascist goon squads have killed those Russians. All right, so that's something people need to understand about how the Russians think about this. Again, I'm not taking sides. I'm just trying to get an understanding why is all this hatred, and that's why we need statesmen and people to get in there. Now, meanwhile, in the West, we have all this, and to this day we have Russiagators who believe that Trump, and you can hate Trump all you want, that Trump is like a puppet of Putin, and that has been debunked constantly. There was no Russian collusion. Now you're allowed to criticize the 2016 election, but you're not allowed to criticize the 2020 election here in the West. And then you got Trudeau up there, and he's gone full authoritarian. The problem is when people do this crazy stuff, this allows people all over the world to say, well, see, democracy doesn't really work. All this crazy, you see, this is the problem when you have Russiagators and Trudeau goes full authoritarian. All this stuff builds up, and this gives people like Putin, he can tell his people, see, they're all liars. They're deceivers. So Putin goes and tells his people, hey, the Americans went in and killed 1 million Iraqis for no damn reason after we, the Russians, told them that, along with Hans Blix, the Swedish UN weapons inspector, there are no weapons in there. They wouldn't listen, and the Americans killed 1 million people. You see how this works? You get no moral high ground. You can't because of the stupidity of the U.S. government with all this warmongering they keep doing. That's why I keep saying stop warmongering. Because it's pointless to do this. It's just to further the careers of diplomats and the State Department people in Washington, D.C., and Hunter Biden. And then so you have basically Joe Biden has made Ukraine a vassal state of the United States, and kind of him personally, it's a vassal state to Biden. And then he puts his son in there, that crazy son of Caligula in there, and then they do all that craziness, on the oil pipeline. So it's far more complicated than they're telling you, is what I'm trying to get at. It's far more complicated. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? I feel for the Ukrainian civilians caught in this vicious crossfire, but a lot of this is because of the stupidity of the U.S. government that we keep mucking into these situations we have no business in. If the pro-Russian Democratic elected government had been allowed to stay in, they could have probably started getting rid of these neo-fascists that were killing those Russians, which was the pretense for Putin to come in. So it's frustrating to me that people don't see the real problems here, pushing Russiagate, pushing this Russia hate, trying to encircle Russia, demeaning Russia. It's not doing us any good. You can hate Putin all you want, you can hate Trump all you want. The problem is when you do that, you put these crazy people like Putin in a corner, and he has no way out, so he lashes out. Anyway, just understand that from the Russian standpoint, I'm not taking their side, they see what happened to the Russian civilians in the Donbass region as a pretense for war, and they went in. Now, I could have understood if they took that. Now, I would have told you that Putin is going to go full blast into Ukraine because he dreams of rebuilding the USSR. Where will this end? I don't know. Now the Europeans, and we're all fighting a proxy war through the Europeans, through the Poles, into the Ukraine against the Russians. So we're at war with Russia via proxy. Where will it end? I don't know. But we really need to get a whole handle on this before this spirals completely out of control.